Hello everyone, and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host, Code Marvelous, and today I'm joined by a special guest, U.S. Nationals champion, Joseki, otherwise known as John in the real world. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, you have just an incredibly interesting deck, something I don't think anybody was expecting to win a premier event, let alone Nationals. But before we get into that, John, tell me a little bit about your Netrunner story and, kind of the road to playing this build and in the tournament.
Cool. So, a few weeks... it's kind of funny. Leading into regionals, I actually kind of felt like I was going to quit Netrunner, which is not anything anyone wants to hear, obviously. But I was really down on it. Cipher was like for me, a card like Cipher kind of symbolizes something I hate about what happens to card games where I'm a deck builder. I love making interesting decks, and when there's a card like Cipher, it casts this very long shadow over the design space you have as a deck builder. So once that was sort of addressed, I knew regionals was coming up, and Kyle James came down from Portland and was staying at my house with Brian, and they're like, what runner do we play? And that's why I came up with Lock Haley. I just brewed it up that night from the TD cards, and then the deck did really well, and I had just a great time seeing everyone. Timmy Wong was there, Ran, all these players who I love seeing. And I remember being like, fine, screw it. And I walked in and bought a TD box. I hadn't bought Netrunner cards in 2 months at this point. And then everyone just laughed at me the whole night. They're like, yeah, you can't get out. So at that point I was in. And once I was in, I was going to Nationals. And we teamed up and started working out some decks. We established early on that CI was good. So we just sort of had that one in the back burner. And we had some players in the group that really wanted to draw our whole deck as runner, since that's what we were doing as Corp. And so we took this core concept of, okay, I can draw my whole deck, now what happens?
Right.
And every decision in the deck, just from that whole process of testing, was how do we get through our deck the fastest? And then once we're there, what wins the game immediately?
Right. Because since there's no equivalent runner, unless you're playing Theophilus, since there's no equivalent thing where you can hold cards turn to turn, if you're drawing your whole deck, you then have to be able to leverage that in that same turn.
Yeah, exactly. So in our deck, we'll get to it, but one of the cards we chose was Bookmark, because it lets us not have to discard. And sort of lets us get all of our cards from our deck into our hand or onto our Bookmark.
Right.
And then once we basically have all of the cards in our deck at our disposal, we can play one big combo turn. The early versions of the deck played Keyhole. They also played Crescentus before we read the card Exploit, which we'll get to in a bit. And yeah, so I mean, just the early versions of the deck were a lot worse. We didn't have Rumor Mill. The legendary card that people like to talk about is Akshar Serene. That was only discovered, 2 or 3 days before we were going to the event. People were it was 2 nights before we were leaving when we figured out Akshar Serene being good in the deck. And all these the cool thing about working on decks as a team, and it's something I really encourage people to do, is you're only one person. It's hard and really hard work to go through 1,000 Netrunner cards and try and parse out the best thing to play. But if you have a group of friends that are all going to the same tournament and you can work with each other on your decks, the sort of combined brain power there is so massive compared to what you're able to accomplish on your own. So as much as I get credit for winning Nationals, everyone in San Francisco who worked on the deck gets credit too, because there's not a single player in my play group who didn't touch this deck at some point by contributing some ideas.
Right. Yeah, and that's great. And I think that's great for people to hear. Most of my deck building experience has also been collaborative. So I think that's very important for people to hear, because I think a lot of people, especially newer players, assume that, big tournament winners or big deck builders were just kind of like mad scientists cooking it up all by ourselves. And that puts a tremendous and unrealistic burden on new players. But yeah, let's jump into it. So let's talk first about the ID, because the ID is in of itself is a surprise for the competitive meta.
Sure. So there's a few things that BIOS is really good at. One thing is that you essentially get a 36 card deck after you take your opening hand. So you get kind of a 41 card deck, right? It's sort of compared to Chaos Theory's 40 cards.
Right.
So that's obviously very powerful in a deck about a deck where you demand consistency from your draws. Because of that sort of need for consistency, anytime you have a deck where you're like, I just really need to draw my professional contacts, or I really need to draw my, I really just want sure gamble in my opening hand every game, an ID like BIOS is where you'd go.
Right.
Because you're just going to have a much higher likelihood of getting the cards you need earlier in the game playing an ID like BIOS. So it was sort of a natural fit. If you have a lot, there are other good shaper options depending on the sort of composition of your deck, but our deck has a lot of events. So the shapers like Kate and Haley are less appealing to us because the glut of the cards in our deck is like all in events.
Right.
So that was kind of why we chose BIOS. The other advantage to playing BIOS is that you can play tech cards when you can play tech cards in BIOS that you normally would be somewhat hesitant to play or would often be dead draws, because you can stash them on your BIOS
and then just never touch them again.
Yeah, and then just sort of like remove them from the game. So a lot of the time, like for example, if you're not playing against yellow and you hit a New Angeles City Hall, putting it on your BIOS increases the card quality of your deck, which is definitely can't be overstated. And of course, if you're looking for a very specific card to start the game with, you can always hide those on your BIOS too and take them on your first turn.
Right. All right. Yeah, I think that's all good. So do we want to start with events since they're kind of the cornerstone of what we're doing here?
Cool. So I'll just like real quickly, the main idea of the deck is to reach a point in the game where you are able to run all 3 central servers and play between 3 and 7 cards on that turn. So the big important one, the most important card in the deck is Apocalypse. It's very hard to run a server with ice like more than 3 times in a turn, let alone the 17 to 20 times you're often going to run in this deck, and Apocalypse just clears the path for you.
Right.
And it's again cornerstone of the deck against decks like the very popular deck, the Moon deck. Has seen a lot of tournament play recently. Apocalypse does crazy good work versus them. It just wipes their whole board, oftentimes hitting agendas along the way, which is great. Glacier decks have a ton of ice. And just getting all of that out of the way is like really what Apocalypse is about. It's about clearing the way for the rest of your game plan.
Okay, so we got 3 Diesels. I hear Diesel's a pretty good card.
Pretty good card. Not much to say about it. Makes you go fast.
Let's talk about this card, because this is this is some of the things that makes me really excited. Like this is some of the spicy business here.
Yeah. So you can take a lot of taking bonus clicks is like in Shaper's wheelhouse, right? That's a Shaper thing to do. And Encore was ruled that you can play multiple Encores in the same turn, and you'll have kind of a queue of turns to take for each Encore you take.
Right.
So if I play 3 Encores all at once, I'm going to take 3 more turns after that one turn, which is really important for a variety of reasons. In this particular deck, it plays right into our win condition, which is running R&D a bazillion times. And it just sort of naturally fits, right? It's like every time you play one, it's like playing a hyperdriver. Click to play it, but then you get a whole turn. So each Encore is basically +3 clicks when you do the math.
Or +4 clicks for a reason.
Or +4 clicks.
Which we'll discuss.
Yep. So there's the Encores. That's just sort of, once you've played the Apocalypse, you got the Encore, so you've already fulfilled the condition of Encore once you've played your Apocalypse, so it's an easy fit there.
Right. We have Exploit.
Yes.
A card I had to look up.
Oh my gosh. I think this speaks, this was Eric Fetaplace, a local player, very good player in our meta. We had 2 Crescentus in the deck, namely because the card Architects manages to survive Apocalypse.
Right.
It has this lovely text where it can't be trashed. And Architect is also a really, really good piece of ice to have after an Apocalypse because it can reinstall all the cards you just trashed with Apocalypse.
Right.
So it's a huge problem, no matter which way you cut it. So we had to be able to answer 3 Architects on R&D because in our testing, once people were figuring out what the deck did, they were just drawing for Architects and stacking them on R&D, and then the deck can't do anything. It can't get through Architect once you've played the Apocalypse. So Exploit conveniently Derezzes up to 3 pieces of ice, which is the maximum number of Architects your opponent can have in play.
Seems good.
Yep. And again, you've already fulfilled the condition of exploit if you have fulfilled the condition of Apocalypse or Encore.
Right. So as long as you've got the clicks to be able to play this before the Apocalypse, which you should, you can just completely wipe the board.
Yep.
So here's something that I think is kind of a strange include, and I want you to kind of go over this with me. Game day seems like a strange include here.
Sure.
Because we're not increasing our hand size in any way.
That's right. So we're already playing quality time in Diesel. And I literally searched on Netrunner DB for the words draw cards.
Right.
And game day came up. And I was like, oh, we can't play game day. Like, we're drawing too many cards and blah, blah, blah. But the thing I realized is that game day actually has great synergy with Bookmark. Since it's already a core part of our strategy to be using Bookmark every turn, you can often Bookmark twice in a turn and then have the only card in your hand to be game day.
Oh, so then you just start your turn, first 2 clicks, fill up your hand.
Yep, exactly. And remember, the sort of operative goal of your entire first several turns is chewing through your deck as quickly as possible.
Right.
And if you're going super hard on your deck, I wish I could play another quality time, right? But I can't. So game day is a fine, bad quality time is kind of what I called it.
Yeah.
It's awkward to use, but it does draw 5, and when your deck starts with 36 cards in it after your mandatory draw, if you play 3 quality times in a game day, you've drawn 20 of your cards, which is the majority of your deck at that point. Right. So just having an extra draw card event, to me, felt like despite being somewhat awkward to use, does speed up your game plan a little bit.
Okay. So we have a singleton notoriety.
This one's interesting. So the thing about notoriety, again, we're fulfilling the condition of notoriety because we're running all 3 centrals, so it's kind of an obvious include. We looked at all the cards that say play only if you made a successful run in all 3 centrals. So you can play 1 or 3 notorieties, and here's basically the logic. Against a normal corp deck, you need to score 4 agendas to win. Because GFI, Global Food Initiative, is only worth 2 in your score area, the sort of normal number of agendas to steal is 4. Playing a single notoriety means that you only have to score 3 agendas to win. You can kind of think of it as like a Mad Dash or a Freedom Through Equality for our deck.
Right.
Where we're just getting 1 extra point, and then we only have to steal 3 agendas. What's interesting is that if you play 2 notorieties, that's not very good because you usually still have to steal 3 agendas.
Right.
Even if you have 2 notorieties. But if you have 3, then you have to steal only 2 agendas. So there's sort of like a balance on how you want to do it. But the basic idea is that a click and a credit is worth a click and a credit for a point is much better than a single access in R&D. A single access in R&D is probably worth like a fifth to a third of a point, depending on the way the game's played out.
Right.
And that's 1 click. So the notoriety is kind of a no-brainer in that you just get to spend a click to make 1 point.
Right. That's fair. So we have 4 out of the ashes.
This is the most flexible card in the deck. I think the minimum number you should play is 3, though the 4th one is kind of flexible. The reason you want to play 3 is because that is the number of central servers the Corp has. The basic idea being that on the turn in which you play all of these quest cards, the cards where you run all 3 centrals, that is the most click-constrained turn. You're going to pop off your hyperdrivers, you're going to get up to 13 clicks, and then on those 13 clicks, you have to play 3 encores, 1 apocalypse, 1 notoriety, 1 exploit, possibly rumor mill, and you have to run all 3 centrals. So if you're forced to go off early, you're also going to have to spend clicks to draw cards in your deck for missing pieces. So having a card in your deck that can be used to give you sort of for a free run on the turn in which you're the most constrained in your ability to play cards is very essential to your deck.
Yeah, I like it.
And yep, and then in the other case too, it's it's just more runs on R&D.
I think one of the big things with this deck that makes it work is that a lot of times when people build these types of combo decks, they are super optimistic about how well they're going to be able to execute that combo.
Yeah.
And this,
definitely.
You have a lot of things that basically hedge or give you like a sideways way of accomplishing what you need to do, so you're not counting on the combo going off exactly the way you would want it.
Exactly. There were multiple games in the tournament where I only had 2 of my hyperdrivers installed, and as a result, my combo turn was 3 clicks short. And having only 10 clicks is much different than having 13, especially if you're forced to go off early. And having Out of the Ashes in your discard pile hedges against those situations, like you said.
Yeah. So we got the quality times for the same reasons that we've discussed. Helps you
Yep.
draw, get everything ready.
Mhm.
Rumor Mill is very good for what ails you if you're a combo deck.
Yep, exactly. So Caprice Nice is a huge problem. At one point in the deck, we were playing political operatives when the deck had Keyhole, but we found that after a few games in testing, and people figured it out that using Caprice Nice on HQ with a couple pieces of ice just shut your whole game plan down,
Right.
since we had no way to get the political operative installed.
Right.
So Rumor Mill kind of just solves all that for you. It's just a nice, clean solution to Caprice Nice, which is the main thing, and as well as Marcus Batty, which losing the side game and trashing your Foust is more or less game over.
Yeah, it's pretty much GG, Bill.
Yep.
We got some money.
Got some money.
So you mentioned the Moons matchup. Is that the primary reason for just the Astrolabe?
Yep. Also, you do need +1 memory. If you have 1 leprechaun installed hosting 2 hyperdrivers and then another hyperdriver in your Foust, in order to be able to install your Foust before your combo turn, you need to have Astrolabe installed.
That's
so having the Astrolabe is just the +1 MU. It makes your deck a little bit more flexible while it's setting up. And of course, very strong versus asset-heavy decks.
All right, and we've got Bookmark.
Yeah, not one that most people have seen played.
I have, but only in
Okay.
like some big Faust-based Shaper decks that I've seen people play.
Yep, which we are. The cool thing about Bookmark, it's actually a really cool card in a lot of ways. And now that I've played with Bookmark more, I've really come to appreciate that this card actually does have utility outside of just hoarding a ton of cards for Foust, which
Right.
is, kind of the obvious way to use it. There's lots of cool things you can do with this card. I had some pretty cool games where it protected me against Boom, where they played 24/7, and I didn't have my New Angeles City Hall, so I cracked my Bookmark, and Stephen Avery in one of the rounds of Swiss didn't have the Boom, but 24/7'd, and then sweeped me for 20 credits.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that was sweet. That was a really cool play by him. So it's just an interesting card. Decks that have things like Best Defense, you can actually put non-important cards on your Bookmark, like daily casts and like other junk, just to sort of keep having that sort of storage of cards you need for Foust without having to commit your key pieces to it. So it turns out it's a very flexible card. Any draw-heavy deck, I would probably consider it in the future, even if I'm not playing a combo deck, especially since it just has so much more utility than Plascrete.
Right. So we have 1 Akshar Serene,
Oh yeah.
which gives you 1 additional click to spend on your turn and the Corp turn.
Yes. So if you remember, we are playing Encore 3 times, which means that we're going to have 3 additional turns beyond the turn in which we play Akshar Serene, which means that Akshar Serene is going to give us 3 bonus clicks for installing her. In addition to that, Akshar Serene also gives you a click back when you install her.
That's true.
So it is clickless, which is very important because the turn you're going to play it on is your big combo turn.
Right.
So having that clickless benefit's also very nice.
There was a great moment on the stream actually where you were like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll get a click on your next turn too." And I was just like, "Yeah, that's nice. That turn's not gonna come."
Yeah, I have a penchant for having kind of a snarky attitude.
Yeah.
So Akshar Serene, often called the worst card in Netrunner, finally found a home in this bizarre combo deck.
If they never get a turn, it's great.
Yep.
So you have 3 daily casts, pretty good.
Yep.
You have a lot of cards with my girl Smoke on it.
Oh yeah.
So we have 2 Dean Listers.
So there are matchups in which the Corp will kind of assume you're playing a diaper style Netrunner deck, which means that you're going to make a lot of huge R&D runs with the DDoS False Echo combo. If they believe you're doing that, that causes problems for you as well, because unlike, I guess, other icebreakers, Foust, your resource is very finite, the number of times you can use Foust. In addition to that, if they have like a 5 iced R&D with a Crisium grid behind it, you're going to have to get in twice. which can be extremely challenging in this deck because so many of your cards are crucially important to use when going off. So Dean Lister is sort of our padding for players installing large amounts of ice and R&D, which is not really the best strategy against the deck, but it's often good enough if you don't have Dean Lister. So Dean Lister is just us hedging against, DNA Tracker, Nisei Token, or some really annoying, obnoxious thing to get through.
That's fair. So we have 2 New Angeles City Halls. I imagine just to keep somebody from blowing us up before we're ready to go.
Yep, there's lots of great cards in yellow that are strong against us. Closed accounts can be pretty punishing. All-Seeing Eye can clear out our daily casts and professional contacts and other resources. New Angeles City Hall just prevents the yellow decks from interacting with us and forces them to try and erase us by scoring agendas before we can win.
Right. So we do have 3 professional contacts.
Yep. This is a weird one. People ask about this card a lot. Laguna Velasco District is the sort of, I guess, poster child of drawing a lot of cards as Shaper now.
But you also need money, and you don't have a lot of other sources of money.
Exactly. So when we were playing Laguna, we were not playing Quality Time because the deck couldn't afford to play Quality Time. Because on the turn you combo off, you're going to need between 6 and 12 credits. So as a result of that, we ended up having to play Armitage Code Busting along with Laguna Velasco District, which, as you can imagine, is pretty slow and clunky. We were playing Laguna and Armitage and no Quality Time. But Proco lets you afford Quality Time, which is great, which compensates for the fact that you're not drawing 2 with every click. Instead, you're drawing 1. So the little bit of extra econ professional contacts makes you throughout a game is enough to be able to play more card draw and have a more stable economy going into the late game.
That's fair. So as far as breakers, we have Foust, which we discussed. It's in this build, it's meant to be kind of a universal, and its hedge, its defender is Chameleon. Talk to me a little bit about what we're fighting with Chameleon.
Cool. So there are a few pieces of ice that are very good against you. One of those pieces of ice is Swordsman. We do not have anything like Sacrificial Construct or Clone Chip to get our Foust back. If the Foust hits the bin, it's never ever coming back with this deck.
Right.
So it is critically important that we have some hedge against cards that interact with our Foust. Chameleon breaks Swordsman when you name Sentry with it, which is great. In addition to that, it also breaks Turing on a central server, which can be very problematic. Because if you have to spend 3 clicks to get through a Turing, that very much constrains your ability to play all these quest cards that are in the deck.
Right.
So having that Chameleon for Turing is also very essential. The final card that's Chameleon is strong against is Hortum. It itself cannot break a triple advanced Hortum, but it can with the help of Dean Lister.
Right.
So that is our Chameleon. It handles our anti-AI ice.
Right. And then here's one of my favorite Shaper cards of recent memory, Equivocation. I love this card so much.
Yeah, it's super cool. When we decided that the Keyhole version of the deck couldn't work because we had to play Rumor Mill or the deck just functionally loses to Caprice.
Right.
We really spent a long time, and at one point we thought the deck was dead. Like we thought it was done. Like there was no way to do it. Like we just couldn't play the deck because of Caprice. But at some point, this is another, I believe Eric Fetaplace again said, well, we can just play Equivocation and run 20 times. And I was like, oh, yeah, that works. It's also cheaper than Keyhole. So there you go. Yeah. Equivocation, which I think in many ways is better than Keyhole.
Right, because if it's an agenda, you can always just steal it instead of having to go and get it out of archives. Yeah, not that that would necessarily be a problem in this deck, but you know what I mean. Because they're supposed to have no ice anyway. But Equivocation says, I'm either milling you, or if it's an agenda, I take it.
Yep, exactly. And also, against small deck corps like Sync,
it's pretty
Equivocation good. Can also just make them draw their whole deck and lose. So it's a pretty cool card. Really interesting Shaper win condition for any of these sort of big power turn decks.
Yeah. I mean, I've been using it a lot. Now that people are going towards like a lot more tagging ice, I've moved off of indexing and Mad Dash for a lot of my Shapers and onto Equivocation, Maker's Eye, because
that's very smart.
I can get in once. I can't get in twice without being very heavily taxed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Equivocation has lots of great uses.
Hyperdriver is really, really good.
Oh yeah, great card.
Yeah.
It's a cool card. When I first played with Hyperdriver, I used it in a professional contacts deck as well, just to get more professional contacts draws. Turns out it's a little bit better when you use it to beat your opponent immediately.
Yeah, seems good. And then, as you mentioned before, Leprechaun hosts 2 programs regardless of memory, so it's just like an anchor to strap the hyperdrivers onto your rig.
Yep, exactly.
And then we have one lonely self-modifying code.
Yeah, I think if I could go back in time, I wouldn't play this.
Wow.
Which is kind of bizarre, right? The reason I wanted the self-modifying code in the deck is because when people know how to play against the deck, they will rush behind a single piece of ice. And having access to kind of a second Foust means that you can challenge rushed agendas,
right?
Essentially. Whereas with only 1 Foust in the deck and no tutoring, you can never challenge rush agendas.
Right.
So the SMC, while beneficial in that regard and occasionally helpful in setup, it's very taxing to pay for because the credits are so tight in the deck to begin with.
Right.
And often you just end up discarding it. So it's interesting. It does add a little bit of consistency to the deck. It can also help you find a leprechaun if you need to. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
But in general, it's almost never the preferred way to interact with your opponent in this deck. But it's there. It's in the list. We're playing with it. So
yeah, and that's the list.
That's the list.
It's pretty good. Well,
lots of weird stuff in there, but it worked out.
Yeah, John, thank you very much for coming on.
Yep.
Everybody watching, we're gonna go over to competitive JNet and we're gonna take it for a spin. And until we see you all again, always be running.